Let me open with something that might catch you off guard. What if a single food could reduce inflammation in your body more effectively than turmeric, the spice that has been celebrated for years as nature's premier anti-inflammatory remedy? Turmeric is genuinely useful, no question. But there's another food that works directly on the biological machinery of inflammation, influencing immune signaling, cellular repair, and the aging process itself. And the research supporting it is remarkably compelling. Clinical studies demonstrate that specific nutrients found in this food can lower inflammatory markers such as interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor, two molecules that actively drive chronic inflammation throughout the body. In one randomized controlled trial with middle-aged and older participants, omega-3 fatty acid supplementation significantly decreased inflammatory cytokines compared to those receiving a placebo. So why does this matter so much as we get older? Because around the age of 50, the body begins developing what scientists refer to as inflammaging, a slow, persistent, low-grade inflammatory state that silently erodes tissues over time. It impacts the joints, the brain, the blood vessels, and critically, metabolic health. Inflammation disrupts insulin signaling. It burdens the liver, it elevates cortisol, and it accelerates many of the diseases we associate with growing older, including heart disease, arthritis, type 2 diabetes, and cognitive deterioration. So if we're serious about supporting healthy aging, the goal isn't simply to mask inflammation. The goal is to switch off the biological signals that triggered it in the first place. Here's what's actually happening inside your body. Inflammation functions like a fire alarm system. When there's injury or infection, the alarm sounds, and that response is genuinely healthy. It mobilizes your immune system. But in many older adults, that alarm never completely silences. It keeps going in the background, day after day, year after year, and that unrelenting signal steadily wears the body down. Here's the remarkable part. Certain foods don't merely suppress inflammation, they actually help your body generate molecules that actively resolve it, essentially switching the alarm system off. Some of the most powerful foods for this purpose contain nutrients your body transforms into compounds called resolvins and protectins, specialized molecules that calm immune activity and facilitate tissue repair. In other words, this food doesn't just block inflammation. It helps your body properly complete the healing process. For older adults, that distinction can make an enormous difference in energy, joint comfort, cardiovascular health, and even cognitive function. So today, I want to break this down in a clear, practical way. We'll cover why inflammation intensifies with age, why turmeric alone often falls short, which food directly deactivates inflammatory pathways, and how to incorporate it into a straightforward weekly protocol that supports metabolic health and longevity. And if you stay with me through to the end, I'll also share a simple routine that many longevity researchers recommend for people over 50 to meaningfully reduce chronic inflammation through natural means. Because when you understand how to address inflammation at its root, you're not just managing symptoms, you're helping your body age on entirely different terms. Let's begin with the core of the problem. Why does inflammation increase as we age? Once you grasp this process, the solution becomes far more intuitive. Scientists use the term inflammaging to describe the gradual, persistent inflammation that develops in the body as the years pass. It's not the kind of inflammation you notice when you twist your ankle or fight off a cold. That variety is short-lived and purposeful. Inflammaging is different. It's quiet, it's ongoing, and it often goes undetected for years. Here's what's unfolding inside your body. Think of your immune system as a home security system. When an intruder appears, the alarm activates, the response team arrives, the threat is neutralized, and then the alarm resets. That's how inflammation is designed to work. But with aging, the system grows hypersensitive. It begins perceiving threats where none actually exist. Aging immune cells linger in the body past their useful life. Damaged cells accumulate, and low-level inflammatory signals begin firing continuously in the background. The alarm never fully resets. Over time, this persistent inflammation begins affecting virtually every system in the body. It stiffens arterial walls. It irritates joints. It compromises the gut lining. It even penetrates the brain. Research published in the Journal of Gerontology indicates that elevated inflammatory markers, including C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, are closely associated with frailty, cardiovascular disease, and cognitive decline in older individuals. But inflammation doesn't just accelerate age-related diseases, it directly undermines metabolism. Here's a useful analogy to visualize this. Think of insulin as a key that unlocks your cells so glucose can enter and be converted into energy. Now picture inflammation as corrosion building up inside that lock. As inflammation increases, the insulin signal weakens, the lock becomes harder to turn. The pancreas compensates by releasing more insulin, and elevated insulin levels direct the body to store fat rather than burn it. This is one of the less obvious reasons many people gain weight with age, even when their eating habits haven't changed dramatically. Inflammation is quietly distorting the body's metabolic messaging, and the damage continues beyond that. Chronic inflammation also strains the liver, the organ responsible for regulating blood sugar, processing fats, and clearing inflammatory compounds. When the liver becomes inflamed, it begins generating more triglycerides and inflammatory molecules, which amplifies the cycle further, so inflammation becomes self-sustaining. Greater inflammation produces more metabolic dysfunction, and that dysfunction generates more inflammation. This is precisely why reducing inflammation is one of the most impactful strategies for healthy aging, not just for joints or heart health, but for energy, weight regulation, and longevity. And here's where many people go wrong. They attempt to suppress inflammation with a single supplement, turmeric, curcumin capsules, or anti-inflammatory medications. But inflammation isn't simply a switch you flip. Your body actually has a dedicated biological system for resolving inflammation naturally, for shutting down the immune response and initiating repair. And the nutrients required to power that system come primarily from specific foods. In the next section, we'll look closely at why turmeric, despite its well-earned reputation, is often not the most effective tool, and why another food activates an entirely different anti-inflammatory pathway that the aging body genuinely needs. Now let's examine turmeric more carefully. It has earned its standing as one of the most potent anti-inflammatory foods in the natural world. Its active compound curcumin has been extensively researched for its capacity to reduce inflammatory pathways in the body, and the evidence is legitimate. Studies confirm that curcumin can inhibit inflammatory signaling molecules such as NF-kappa B, a protein complex that plays a central role in triggering inflammation. When NF-kappa B activates, it prompts the release of inflammatory cytokines including interleukin-1, interleukin-6, and TNF-alpha. So yes, turmeric can help dial down those signals. But here's what most people fail to appreciate. Turmeric mainly works by blocking inflammation, not resolving it. Here's an analogy to make that distinction clear. Imagine inflammation like a building fire, and firefighters responding to it. Blocking inflammation is like instructing the firefighters to stop spraying water. Resolving inflammation is something altogether different. It means the fire has been fully extinguished, the smoke has cleared, and restoration work has begun. Folks, your body has a specialized biological system built to do exactly that. It produces compounds called specialized pro-resolving mediators, or SPMs, molecules known as resolvins, protectins, and merisins. Their purpose isn't simply to reduce inflammation, but to actively switch off the inflammatory response once the underlying threat has been addressed. This resolution process matters enormously for healthy aging, because in many older adults, the body's capacity to efficiently produce these resolving molecules diminishes. Inflammatory signals persist, but the off switch grows weaker. Here's where the research becomes particularly fascinating. These inflammation-resolving molecules are not generated from turmeric. They are produced from omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA, the beneficial fats found in certain types of fish. When the body receives EPA and DHA, the beneficial fats found in certain types of fish. When the body receives EPA and DHA, enzymes convert them into resolvins and protectins, which signal immune cells to stand down, halt the release of damaging compounds, and begin removing damaged tissue so true healing can take place. Research published in Nature Reviews Immunology has demonstrated that these molecules help terminate excessive immune activity, clear cellular debris, and promote tissue restoration. In other words, they bring the inflammatory cycle to its proper conclusion. Without them, inflammation can persist silently in the body for years, and that chronic unresolved inflammation is what underpins many age-related conditions. There's another challenge with turmeric worth noting. Even though curcumin carries impressive properties, the body absorbs very little of it. Studies indicate that curcumin has extremely low bioavailability unless paired with substances like piperine, the active compound in black pepper. Simply incorporating turmeric into meals, while beneficial, may not deliver enough active compounds to meaningfully influence chronic inflammation. This is why turmeric alone frequently fails to produce significant results for persistent inflammatory conditions. What the body typically needs instead is a consistent supply of nutrients that engage the inflammation resolution system directly. And this leads us to the food that researchers repeatedly identify as one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory options available: fatty fish. Specifically, fish with high concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids. In the next section, we'll explore why foods like salmon, sardines, and mackerel exert such profound effects on inflammation and how they influence not only the immune system, but also metabolism, brain health, and longevity. For anyone over 50, this mechanism carries particular weight because these nutrients help restore something the aging body gradually loses: the ability to turn inflammation off at its source. So let's talk about the food itself. The one food that research consistently places at the top when it comes to reducing inflammation efficiently and durably. Fatty fish, including salmon, sardines, mackerel, anchovies, and herring, are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, specifically two powerful compounds: EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. These are not simply healthy fats. They function as biological signals that shape how the immune system operates. Here's what's unfolding inside your body. When omega-3 fats are consumed, the body converts them into those specialized molecules mentioned earlier: resolvins, protectins, and marzins. Think of these compounds as the body's internal peacekeepers. When inflammation begins, immune cells mobilize toward the affected area. That's an appropriate response. But without a signal directing those cells to stop, they can continue releasing inflammatory chemicals long after the original threat has passed. Resolvins provide that signal. They instruct immune cells to stand down, discontinue the release of damaging compounds, and initiate the clearance of damaged tissue so genuine healing can proceed. Research published in Cell Metabolism has demonstrated that omega-3 fatty acids significantly reduce inflammatory cytokines while enhancing metabolic signaling within immune cells. A separate, large-scale clinical study in older adults found that omega-3 supplementation lowered both C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, two prominent markers of the chronic inflammation linked with aging. In short, omega-3 fats help restore the body's natural inflammation resolution process. Here's something particularly significant for older adults. Omega-3 fats don't just influence inflammation, they shape cell membranes. Picture every cell in your body surrounded by a protective wall, the cell membrane. That membrane governs what enters the cell and what exits. When membranes become rigid or inflamed, intercellular communication breaks down. Hormones like insulin lose their effectiveness, nutrients enter less efficiently, and metabolic waste builds up. Omega-3 fatty acids are physically incorporated into those membranes, increasing their flexibility and responsiveness. This enhances insulin sensitivity, supports neural signaling, and reduces inflammatory pressure on tissues throughout the body. It's why omega-3 intake has been consistently linked to reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, arthritis, and metabolic syndrome. For older adults, this effect can be particularly profound, because with age, cell membranes naturally become less fluid and more prone to inflammation. Omega-3 fats help restore that equilibrium. Now let's get practical. How much fatty fish is actually needed? Guidelines from organizations like the American Heart Association recommend 2 servings of fatty fish per week, approximately 3 to 4 ounces per serving. Good options include wild salmon, sardines, mackerel, anchovies, and herring. Sardines in particular stand out as exceptionally nutrient-dense. Being small fish, they accumulate fewer environmental contaminants. They also deliver an impressive combination of nutrients alongside omega-3s, vitamin D, calcium, selenium, and high-quality protein, all valuable for aging bodies. Here's a practical habit many longevity specialists recommend. Build 2 anti-inflammatory meals per week around fatty fish. For example, lunch featuring sardines with olive oil, leafy greens and avocado, and dinner centered on grilled salmon with vegetables and extra virgin olive oil. This pairing delivers omega-3 fats, polyphenols, fiber, and antioxidants, all working in concert to quiet inflammatory pathways. Now let's go deeper into something many people never associate with inflammation: weight gain and metabolic slowdown. Many older adults describe something like this: I haven't changed how I eat, but I'm gaining weight, my energy has dropped, and burning fat feels harder than it used to. And in many cases, the invisible driver behind that shift is chronic inflammation. Here's the mechanism. Inflammation interferes with one of metabolism's most critical hormones, insulin. After eating, insulin's job is to move glucose from the bloodstream into the cells where it can be used for fuel. But when inflammation is present, inflammatory molecules like TNF-alpha and interleukin-6 disrupt that signaling pathway. Picture insulin as a messenger knocking on a cell door. Under normal conditions, the door opens readily. But when inflammation is elevated, it's as though the lock has been jammed. The signal weakens. Glucose stays in the bloodstream longer, and the body responds by producing more insulin. The metabolic consequence is significant. Elevated insulin levels push the body in three directions: store fat, halt the burning of existing fat stores, and amplify hunger signals. This is a key reason why chronic inflammation is strongly connected to metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. Research published in Diabetes Care has shown that elevated inflammatory markers are reliable predictors of insulin resistance over time. But inflammation's reach extends beyond insulin. It affects fat tissue directly. Fat cells are not simply inert calorie warehouses. They are metabolically active, releasing hormones and signaling molecules. When fat cells become inflamed, as frequently happens with aging and poor metabolic health, they begin secreting pro-inflammatory compounds called adipokines. These compounds amplify systemic inflammation further, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Inflammation drives insulin resistance. Insulin resistance promotes fat storage. An additional fat generates more inflammatory signals. This loop is a major reason why weight management becomes increasingly difficult with age. And this is where omega-3 rich foods demonstrate remarkable power. Omega-3 fatty acids help reduce inflammatory activity within fat tissue. They also enhance insulin sensitivity and metabolic flexibility. Multiple clinical studies have associated higher omega-3 intake with improved insulin signaling and reduced triglyceride levels. Perhaps even more importantly, omega-3s help calm inflammation in the liver. The liver sits at the center of metabolic health, governing blood sugar regulation, fat processing, and the clearance of inflammatory compounds. When the liver becomes inflamed, a state closely linked to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, metabolic health deteriorates swiftly. Omega-3 fats help reduce hepatic fat accumulation and improve lipid metabolism throughout the body. This is why consistently eating omega-3 rich foods like fatty fish supports multiple metabolic systems simultaneously: immune regulation, insulin signaling, fat metabolism, and liver function. One straightforward dietary adjustment can produce perceptible gains in energy, body composition, and overall vitality. Now let's move from science to action, because real change comes from consistent habits, not just knowledge. The question becomes, how can older adults practically use this information to actively reduce inflammation week after week? Here's a streamlined protocol that nutrition scientists and longevity researchers frequently recommend. Think of it as an anti-inflammatory rhythm for the body. Step 1 is straightforward. Eat fatty fish 2 to 3 times per week. This is the most dependable way to ensure consistent intake of EPA and DHA, the omega-3 fats the body needs to manufacture those inflammation-resolving molecules. Ideal choices include wild salmon, sardines, mackerel, anchovies, and herring. Sardines remain particularly compelling, small enough to avoid significant toxin accumulation, and densely packed with omega-3s, vitamin D, calcium, selenium, and quality protein. One key point about consistency: omega-3 fatty acids incorporate gradually into cell membranes over time. Think of it as a slow, systematic upgrade to the materials from which your body's cells are constructed. With repeated intake, those membranes become more flexible, less inflammatory, and more responsive to metabolic hormones. This improvement doesn't result from one meal. It emerges from sustained intake across weeks and months. Step 2, combine omega-3 foods with polyphenol-rich plant foods. These include leafy greens, berries, olive oil, green tea, and walnuts. Polyphenols reduce oxidative stress, another significant driver of inflammation. You can think of oxidative stress as biological rust forming within the body. Polyphenols act as protective compounds that prevent that rust from spreading. When omega-3 fats and polyphenols are consumed together, they generate a potent anti-inflammatory synergy. A meal of grilled salmon, spinach, olive oil, and berries, for instance, delivers omega-3 fats, fiber, antioxidants, and polyphenols, all contributing to quieting inflammatory pathways simultaneously. Step 3 is something many people overlook entirely. Balance omega-3 intake by reducing omega-6 overload. Modern diets contain disproportionately high levels of omega-6 fats, largely from processed seed oils found in packaged foods and fast food. Omega-6 fats are not inherently harmful, the body requires them. But the ratio matters enormously. Historically, human diets maintained roughly a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fats. Today, many people consume ratios closer to 15-to-1 or even 20-to-1. That imbalance actively promotes inflammatory signaling. By increasing omega-3 intake and cutting back on ultra-processed foods, you restore a more favorable balance within the body. Now let's close with something that weighs on many people as they age: brain health. Because inflammation doesn't confine itself to joints, metabolic tissue, or the heart. One of the most vulnerable organs to chronic inflammation is the brain itself. And what researchers are increasingly finding is that many forms of cognitive decline are deeply tied to neuroinflammation, inflammation occurring within the brain. Here's how it unfolds. The brain contains its own immune cells called microglia, whose role is to defend the brain against infection and clear out damaged cellular material. But when systemic inflammation remains elevated over years, microglia become overactivated. Rather than simply protecting the brain, they begin releasing inflammatory compounds that can damage neurons. Over time, this inflammatory environment disrupts communication between brain cells. Memory becomes less reliable, concentration becomes more difficult, and the brain grows increasingly susceptible to neurodegenerative conditions. Research published in the journal Neurology has found that higher levels of systemic inflammation correlate with accelerated cognitive decline in older adults. And this is where omega-3 fatty acids, DHA in particular, play a truly extraordinary role. DHA is not merely another beneficial nutrient. It is one of the primary structural fats that the brain is actually built from. Roughly 30 to 40% of the polyunsaturated fats found in brain tissue are DHA. The brain literally incorporates DHA into its architecture to construct and maintain neuronal membranes. Here's an analogy to bring that to life. Imagine brain cells exchanging signals across a bridge. When the bridge is sound and well maintained, messages travel rapidly and with precision. But when the bridge deteriorates or becomes unstable, communication slows and degrades. Inflammation weakens those bridges. DHA helps rebuild and reinforce them, supporting membrane integrity, enhancing neurotransmission between neurons, and reducing inflammatory activity within the brain itself.